Hey guys, so we're in the middle of a heat wave and we're getting 95 up to almost 100 degrees here in the deep south. And humidity and heat are one of those things that can be quite deadly. Last winter I showed you how to make a heater for your home, and today I'm going to show you how to make an AC unit that's made either using power, or if you're out of power, if you have a storm or hurricane or whatever it is, you have no power, I'm going to show you how to cool a very small area. This is not going to be a device that will cool the entire house, but it will cool a small room or a small area. Now this unit is really easy to put together. It doesn't require any special skills, but you have to kind of be prepped for this happening if you have some type of AC filter or power outage during a very, very hot time of year. So this will absolutely keep you cool on those nights when you're trying to sleep and the room is just way too hot. I'll show you how to put this together in about 30 minutes or less. Now the first thing you need is a container of some size. Now you can use a cooler like this. I picked this up for $5 at my local Goodwill and it was used, but I'm going to show you how to make an overnight cooler. This one would probably last a solid 24 hours before you need to recharge it. But you're going to need something to cut a round hole, so I'm going to use my hole saw. Also, like I said, I'm going to use this bucket right here, which would probably last between 8 and 9 hours before you needed to recharge it. Now the reason I use the hole saw is you get a perfectly round cut, and there's a couple of tricks to doing this. When you're using a hole saw, don't try to go in forward clockwise on this. You need to do it counterclockwise, because when you go forward it's going to grip the bucket and kind of jerk it around. So reverse your saw if you're using a hole saw. The other thing to remember is when you're doing this is make sure you're wearing a very good pair of leather gloves, because this hole saw can jump around and it has very sharp bits right here on the edge, so you don't want to cut your hand while doing this. Now there's a very special way I'm doing this. I'm not putting this cold air just into the room in general. I'm going to put it into a very specific spot to help you get a good night's sleep. But some of the things you might need, I'm using a lot of different products, or I'm giving you a lot of different examples of things you use. You can pick this up at the hardware store for practically nothing. I'll put a link in the description if you don't have a hardware store close to your home and you just want to have it shipped directly to you. But this is a downspout for a gutter, and it's very flexible and you can expand it. Or you can actually use a dryer vent. These hook up to your dryer vent to expel the hot air from wherever you have your dryer. And even if you don't have that, if you have just a wet dry vac, if you have a hose like this that goes to your wet dry vac, and you want to make sure that you clean it before you use it, because there can be a lot of dust and debris, so you take a hose pipe and rinse it out for a good 2 or 3 minutes. But what we're doing is we want to transfer the cold air from our initial device to exactly where we need it. And it's a very special way that I'm doing this, not just a general trying to cool down an entire room, but the way this works, you will be able to get a good night's sleep in a very cold spot. Now this dryer vent was actually part of a kit. It came with this, and you hook this up to the back of your dryer, and it's a multi-piece kit. So I'm going to use it to make it a lot easier to hook up to this bucket. And one of the ways we can do this, it's a little bit of a tight fit, but if it's not a perfect fit in the hole you're cutting, you can use some of this duct tape. It's not the traditional duct tape. This is a metallic, I guess they call this furnace tape or something like that, but it's metallic. It can deal with a lot of moisture hitting it, so sometimes different types of tapes don't do well. So you might try just standard duct tape, but I think this furnace type tape, is what I call it, will work even better, because there's going to be a little bit of moisture around here and you don't want the tape to fall off while it's working and cooling the area you're trying to cool. Now in the beginning of the video I mentioned this can be made using electricity or if you have a power outage. And so what you're going to need is you're going to need a battery operated fan like this. This little Honeywell fan will run all night long, and it will use, I'll show you real quick, there's actually a plug on the back of it that you can hook it up to a USB charger, so you could have even more power. So if you have 2 or 3 USB chargers, the portable type batteries, you could charge literally, you could run the fan literally for multiple days before you ran completely out of power if you were in the middle of a power outage situation, which commonly happens sometimes in the deep south when we have a storm come through. Now, if you do have power but your AC has failed, then using something like this, a fan like this, will work great. But regardless of your situation, I would probably create 2 of these lids depending on what situation you might think you might encounter, whether you're talking about a complete power outage or just an AC filter, an AC failure. So the first lid I'm going to put together, I'm going to use the powered fan. It has 2 settings. This was like around $10 or $15 on Amazon, so it was really cheap. But what we want to do, we want to disassemble this All right, so any type of flathead screwdriver is going to remove this. There's just some little small clips around three or maybe four areas of the fan. So you just go around the edges of the fan twisting and it'll pop the front right off. What we want to do is we want to make sure that our fan does not fall into the bucket. So we're going to need the hole we're cutting on the top of our bucket to be slightly smaller than the diameter or the outer area of our main fan. And again, if you're using a battery powered fan like this one, this has got, right now it has, I think, 3 or 4 AA batteries, and it works great. We can also, as I said, there's a special plug for it that hooks up to USB, so literally you could have hours and hours, depending on how many USB chargers, you could have 1, 2, or even 3 days of power running your little mini air conditioner here. Now, a good razor blade is going to cut the top of these 5-gallon bucket lids pretty easily, but we want to make sure that the inner hole is smaller. So I just found something I can use as a template. This is slightly smaller, as you can see, maybe by 1/4 to 1/2 an inch smaller. So again, we don't want our fan falling into our device here, so we're going to just put this lid on here, try to center it as best we can, and we're going to mark around the edges where we're going to take our razor blade. And now we'll cut this out. Again, depending on your device, what other type of fan you have, you would definitely have to cut a smaller hole. You don't want to hold this large because you're going to have the air coming straight back out. So you just want to make it where it's a nice snug fit, but where the fan will not fall into the device. Now I want to talk just a sec for the cost of doing this. You may have almost every component to put this together. Over my left shoulder here, you'll see a Coleman cooler from the 80s that I purchased at, I think it was the Goodwill store, and it was practically nothing. I think it was $10. And the little styrofoam cooler, about the same rate at your grocery store, but depending on where you go, you can get them probably a little cheaper and maybe a little thinner styrofoam. That's kind of a thick styrofoam cooler. So depending on what you have around your house, you could create this yourself, and you could upsize it. You could make it as big as you like and cool a room even longer, and maybe even a little bit larger room. Like I said, you're not going to cool an entire house with this, but in an emergency situation where you have a power outage or your AC fails, such as what happened to us just a few years ago. We just had one fuse go out. Didn't know what the issue was, and when the power guy came out, he had it fixed in 15 minutes. But it was just a simple fuse, but it was a 24-hour wait for him to get here. Now, I'll show you completely the finishing up part of how to put it together, but first I want to say a little bit about how you put this into your home. You're not just going to set this in a room. There's a very specific way you can do this where you can get a nice solid 8-hour sleep and not even be the slightest bit warm. You may actually have to cut it off because you may become too cold. Now, this is what your finished bucket should look like. You're going to have your hole in the side, and then you're going to have your lid, which you can snap down. Make sure it's secure, and then we're going to test our fan to make sure it doesn't fall through. It's just the right size so it won't fall through. And again, like I said, we're going to use a little bit of tape to secure it in place. Now, if you want to drill holes in your fan, you could do that, but we may have to do a little bit of maintenance on it, so I'm just going to tape it down and make it a little bit easier on me. So we'll just have a little bit of tape around the edges to keep it from sliding around as it's working during the night. And as I said, it has a low and high, and where we're going to place this, you may actually have to have it on low during the night when you're sleeping. Now, when it comes to your exhaust vent, there's probably going to be a little bit of variance there, but you can either use what I was telling you about the downspout, and this expands out. You can pull it, you can shape it. You can do the same thing with the dryer vent, but just for the greenhouse, I'm going to install the dryer vent, the downspout, because I kind of like the look of it. This one, like I said, this will stretch out quite a ways, so if you have the AC in one area and you're sleeping in another, you can have a lot more distance between you and that. And like I said, this comes as a kit, so you can put it all together. But let's just do it with this downspout so I can set it back up on my table and do a demonstration of the air temperature. And we're going to measure that with my laser measuring, I'm trying to think what this is called, but anyways, we'll measure the temperature coming out and see how well this works. Now, there's several different ways you could do this, but I think the most efficient way is going to be using these frozen 2-liter bottles. I keep these in my freezer, so if something happens to my AC system or we have a small power outage, I can use the battery operated fan, or if the AC, like I said, has the problem with the fuse going out, which took a 24-hour wait for them to get here to repair that, it's just one of those things that you can have cool air while you're sleeping and you don't have to burn up in your house. So you're going to take 4 of these 2-liter bottles, put in there, and keep them in your freezer, or if you have a deep freeze, you could have as many as you want. You could have 15 or 20 bottles just sitting at the bottom of a large deep freeze, and then when you needed them, you would have multiple days of a cooling effect from this little device here. But what I want to tell you is there's a very special way that you put this into the bedroom so you can get a good night's sleep. Now, the reason I'm opting for these 2-liter bottles is I considered just doing it with straight ice, and that's okay, but then once your ice is melted, you just have to pour the water out. But if you're using these 2-liter bottles that are filled with water, you can refreeze them once they completely thaw out, and believe me, these take quite a while to completely thaw. If you use the ice packs from the dollar store, these little off-brand sodas, once you're finished with them, I think they cost $1. So the container is literally just $1, where you're going to pay for the ice packs that you can refreeze. They're $2 or $3 even at the dollar store. So I would recommend the off-brand sodas. I don't drink soda. I do drink carbonated water. So these went for someone else. I let them use it, and then I asked for the soda bottles back, which kind of got me a strange look. Now, the last part of the video, we'll do a test on the air temperature coming out, but now I'm going to tell you how you're going to place this in a bedroom and get a solid 8-hour sleep, and actually may have to cut it down on the low setting. The way you do this, you don't just let this put cold air into the room. That's not going to cool down the room significantly. You might get a few degrees cooler, but if it's extremely hot outside, maybe. But the way you do this is you're going to place this under a blanket at the foot of your bed or a sheet and allow the cold air to blow directly under the sheet. And that's why I'm saying you may have to cut it on low, because the cold air coming out of here, which may be anywhere 50 to 60 degrees, is going to be quite cold during the night. So that's the way I would do it, and that's the way we did it last time when we had the power outage and also when we had the fuse go out. So I've used this 2 times and it worked great. But remember, the key is not trying to cool down the temperature of the entire room, but just cooling that very small area under the sheet on your bed, and you'll see a huge difference if you have an emergency situation. And believe me, I'm the kind of person, I cannot sleep in a hot room. Now, moving it around inside of the exhaust vent, we're looking at about 51 degrees. I chose to do this early in the morning, and the temperature in the greenhouse is over 70 degrees. It's getting close to 80. So I didn't want to do this inside our home. I wanted to make sure I was somewhere where it was already quite warm. And so this is looking at about 51 degrees, steady. And if you put this on low setting, moved up a little bit to 53, but if you move this in your bedroom and put it directly under your bed, I think you would find that it would very quickly cool down a very, very small area. We're talking about just a few cubic feet, but that's why I think this has worked so well overnight. So there we go. We're at 55, 57, but I'm moving it around a little bit. And so the temperature in the greenhouse is rising quickly. Now, this air feels exactly like the air that I would have coming out of my AC unit and my big AC unit, not my window units. The window units put out literally frozen air almost, but this is putting out really nice refrigerated air. So in a very confined small area, you'd find you'd be able to cool it down quickly. But an entire room, maybe a small bathroom, you could do it, but in a larger bedroom, it's not going to work well. So we're having to cool down the smallest area possible. And so it came to me that several years ago, when this idea popped in my head, when we had no AC in a very hot part of summer, just put the exhaust vent under the sheet and it'll cool down the bed and you'll be able to sleep. Again, you may actually have to cut it on the low setting because it's definitely putting out cool air. Now, depending on your freezer size, if you have a huge deep freeze, you could create this in a much larger size, such as this metallic, the metal cooler, I think from the early 1980s or something like that. And you wouldn't feel quite so bad about cutting a hole in it and demolishing its original use of being a cooler if you get it at the secondhand store, Goodwill, for like $10 or $15. So you can get these buckets for practically nothing. If you go to a bakery, they often are throwing these away. So if you have a local bakery close to you, they put different types of product in it, and they usually don't want them once they're through them. If you go to a local sandwich shop, I'm trying to remember the name of it, it's Firehouse Subs. They sell these for about $3, and that goes to a good cause. So depending on the size of your deep freeze, you could create this as big as you want to, and you might actually be able to cool down a larger size room, but you're going to have between 10 and 15 of those frozen bottles, which is going to take up a lot of space in a deep freeze, but in an emergency situation, it would make all the difference. So This is the smaller size, and then of course, like I was saying, you can make it as big as you want it. So guys, I hope you'll put these parts together and just have it waiting in case you do have an AC failure or you have some type of power outage, whether through storm or natural disaster. It really helps a lot when you cannot sleep. I'm the kind of person, as I said just a minute ago, I cannot sleep in a hot room, so I might be lucky to get 2 hours sleep across an entire night if it's 80 degrees in the room. So you can put one of these together for practically nothing and almost free, except for the cost of a couple of parts there. So guys, I really appreciate you watching. If you're really interested in these type of videos, I set up a Patreon for videos that may never find their way to YouTube. And if you have a comment or a question, I hope you'll become a public subscriber first, because I put those people to the front of the line on answering questions. I get anywhere from 100 to 300 comments and questions a day, so it's nearly impossible to answer everybody. So I give priority to anybody who's subscribed to the channel. Guys, I really appreciate you watching, and have a great day.